My name is Craig McInnes. I'm co-CEO, co-founder of My Caribou, and really excited to be hosting today's session on entering the UK market. A little bit about us. It's a global platform to basically allow medtech distributors and manufacturers to build more successful partnerships globally. Those could be new partnerships, existing partnerships, replacing existing partnerships, and we also are getting ready to launch some foreign exchange and payment processing capabilities that can save up to 3% on foreign exchange and also manage volatility through hedging. So happy to share more with anyone. I'll give you my contact information at the end. So let's do some introductions to today's presenters from Lexington and ABHI. So first, Alison Woodhouse leads Lexington's responsible business practice and delivers strategic advice on ESG reporting requirements and social value to support businesses with UK procurement, corporate communications, and brand partnerships. Next, we have Michael Latham, Associate Director at Lexington, and works across the healthcare practice. Michael has extensive experience and expertise in supporting international medtech companies as they enter the UK market. And finally, Phil Brown is the Director of Regulatory and Compliance with ABHI. Phil is a fellow of TOPRA and lectures at the Sheffield Hallam University on medical device regulatory frameworks. Very excited to have all three of you today. Really appreciate your time.
We're just ever so pleased to be speaking to industry colleagues from around the world to discuss the opportunities available to you in the UK. Of course, we're biased, but we think the UK is a fantastic location to establish, research, develop, and evaluate, and of course, sell products and services in the world-renowned NHS. And we look forward to sharing some thoughts and reflections on the UK and how you can best succeed in this market. Of course, it's not without its challenges, particularly in the post-COVID world in which we find ourselves, but the opportunities are there. It's a great place to establish a business, a thriving life sciences ecosystem with a wealth of support available to organizations seeking to support the NHS in improving patient outcomes and healthcare service delivery. And I'm, of course, very pleased to be joined by my colleague, Alison Woodhouse, Lexington's Director of Responsible Business, and of course, Phil Brown, the Director of Regulatory and Compliance at the ABHI. So thank you both for joining as well. So we just move on to the agenda. So as you can see, I guess we'll just get that up on screen in a second, but we've got a very packed agenda. Perhaps in the spirit of typical British enthusiasm and overreach, we've somewhat overpacked it. So we're going to begin with a very quick introduction and, of course, the obligatory sales pitch of Lexington Health and the ABHI. We'll then give you a quick introduction of the UK health system and the UK medtech market, the context and the macro trends shaping the way in which medtech is being procured and adopted. We'll then turn to a review and an overview of the medtech adoption process in the UK. We'll then turn to Phil, who's going to share some regulatory considerations, some do's and don'ts which should shape your approach. And finally, we'll consider the changing landscape of NHS procurement and the importance of considering social value as a central criteria in the procurement process. We'll end our session with a few thoughts on getting your communications approach right, if we have time, before we turn to you for questions and answers. As Craig suggested, there's going to be some polling questions throughout to awake you from any slumber that you go into, certainly from listening to me talk for about 25 minutes. But look, we're really excited to be doing this, but safe to say that 1 hour to go through everything that you need to be considering when you enter the UK is in no way sufficient. So it's not sufficient for everything we want to say, but much more importantly, it's not sufficient to answer the questions that organizations and individuals joining may have about the UK, whether that's about the UK health service, the medtech adoption process, or indeed the challenges and opportunities that your individual technologies may face at this current moment. So safe to say we welcome the opportunity to pick up conversations following the webinar, and our emails are going to be shared by the My Caribou team at the end of the presentation. So if we go on to the next slide, I think they're up for the audience. Just on to the next one, please. So about Lexington Health. So Lexington Health is the healthcare practice, the healthcare arm of Lexington. We're one of the UK's leading strategic communication services, and we really pride ourselves on working at the forefront of public affairs. That might be termed corporate affairs in different markets, but public relations and communications more broadly. As an organisation, we're about to celebrate our 25th year in the business in November. We started as a boutique agency set up by two of former Prime Minister Tony Blair's advisors, and we're really proud to have grown into a company of over 100 consultants We work in offices in London, we've got offices in Manchester, in Edinburgh, and most recently Dubai, where we've established a practice to service a growing client base in the UAE. In terms of our client work, while we're UK-based, we support clients based in other countries and work at the local, national, and international level across each of our practices. Those practices themselves cover a range of sectors, specialties, and disciplines, whether that's corporate comms, data and insights, design and digital, and of course, responsible business. But healthcare is really one of the largest practices we work in. And you can see some of the clients on the right-hand side of the slide. We're really proud to partner with organizations from across the life sciences sector, whether that's pharmaceutical companies, medtech companies, healthcare providers, trade associations, charities, other third sector bodies. And we help them to understand the key challenges in the environment, engage with decision makers at every level, and leverage opportunities to help them achieve their commercial objectives and commercial success. So thinking about the next slide is really how we can help organizations. And this slide provides an overview of some of the services that we offer to our clients in the life sciences, whether that's supporting them to create and build their profile in the UK press, developing and executing product campaigns. And these are always driven by insights-led collateral, whether that's data, reports, clinical case studies. We work with our clients to build impactful and at times, dare I say, award-winning campaigns and coalitions at every level of the health system. Just a note as well, we're more than happy to share some case studies and some examples of the work that we've done following this course. So please do email me directly if you'd like to see those. We work directly with clinical and other healthcare audiences, engaging them around a particular product or technology, or developing advisory boards to support organizations to help them gain clinician-led insights, engage key opinion leaders and support campaigns. And the same goes for patient groups, which those of you who are already working in the UK, and for those of you who have ambitions in the UK, is an ever more important consideration, thinking about how you can support them in driving and meeting unmet need across the patient pathway at the moment in the NHS. So just one last note on about Lexington as a business. We really pride ourselves on the bespoke programs we develop for clients. No client's needs are the same as any other, and therefore the programs that we create are always individual and tailored. So we look forward to discussing some of the challenges and the opportunities that you might have at a later date. But enough on the spiel from me. I'll pass across to Phil to give you a breakdown of the ABHI.
Thank you so much, Michael. Blimey, how do you follow that? Thank you very much again to Craig and his team for the opportunity of speaking to you, and to Michael and Alison for including me in the agenda here. ABHI, I'm the Director of Regulatory and Compliance, which does what it says on the tin, really. So I'm responsible for UK regulation across medical devices, but I dabble a little bit in diagnostics, although we have other expertise in that area, as well as in the digital space. But just by way of introduction to ABHI, that's my role within ABHI, but we are a traditional trade body. We currently have around 420 members, of which 75% are SMEs. And although that 420 members represents no more than about 10% of the UK ecostructure for health tech companies, there are around 4,000 companies in the UK in total. Those 420 members represents probably around 80% of the National Health Service spend. So we see ourselves as probably the largest of the trade bodies in this area. We have a number of different pieces of expertise within ABHI, not just regulation, but also ensure that we have those deep relationships with the NHS, as well as having an international presence and very much working on policy areas with government. So, as I say, typical sort of trade body stuff. Next slide.
Fantastic. Thanks ever so much, Phil. So appreciate I'll be preaching to the choir for some of this, but I thought it might be very helpful for some on the call to just give a quick breakdown of the UK health system. So at the core of the UK health system is the National Health Service, as I'm sure many of you know, publicly funded, publicly provided healthcare system, and that's responsible for the overwhelming majority of care, about 85–90% of the care taking place in the UK. Funded primarily through taxation to ensure that healthcare remains accessible to all, regardless of their financial circumstances. Although with the pressures that we're currently facing, we're seeing an increasing percentage of the population turn to private healthcare, particularly for elective or planned surgical procedures, as well as other areas of care, whether that's GP and or dental care as well. The NHS itself is divided into 4 distinct systems, one for England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, the 4 nations of the UK. And each system has its own management, policies, budgetary control, which results in some variations for service provision and policies across different regions of the UK. And it goes without saying that companies seeking to enter and engage in the UK market need to be mindful of these regional variations when you form your market entry and your engagement strategies for those 4 different nations. This presentation is primarily going to cover NHS England. That's the largest population of the 4 systems, serves about 56–58 million people, manages the majority of NHS budget and commissioning responsibilities. NHS Scotland, population of around 5.5 million, has its own separate policies and administration. NHS Wales, about 3.1 million, and Health and Social Care Northern Ireland is about 1.9 million people in that that nation in the UK. So the NHS, one of the world's largest employers, it's about 1.5 million people working in it, covering a range of service provision. And this is roughly, or is in an overall way, broken down into the following areas. So that's primary care, general practitioners, GPs, family doctors, and local clinics, which provide that first line of care provision, whether that's consultations, whether that's diagnoses, referrals to secondary care, so hospital or specialist services offering specialized treatments, surgeries and complex medical care, and also accident and emergency care in the A&E departments. The NHS also provides mental health services, mental health support through a network of hospitals supported by professionals and facilities, and finally public health services. So it's responsible for promoting public health initiatives, disease prevention, health education, which is certainly prevention becoming an ever more important part of NHS policy as the service develops. So just onto the next slide. I thought it would be useful just to provide a quick overview of the latest NHS organizational structure. Now, this is true as of this afternoon. You never know how things might change and develop, especially with an election coming up next year. But here you get a kind of clear sense of how the organization works in England. So a Department for Health and Social Care, responsible for overall health policy, and NHS England, the arm's length body of that department, which supports and oversees the commissioning of health services, allocates budget to different parts of the NHS. So funding flows from the Department for Health and Social Care to NHS England, which allocates funding for the rest of the NHS at a national level. So the NHS's budget this year was about £156 billion, I think. So that's the kind of numbers that we're looking at, and it's probably expected to grow considerably over the next few years as we meet some of the challenges faced in the post-COVID world. A key structural change that's taken place in the NHS, which those already selling into our health service will be aware of, but those who are not really should be aware of is some of the changes that were established through the Health and Social Care Act in 2022. And this made extensive changes to the structure of the NHS in England, and this was the establishment of 42 integrated care systems across the UK. And these ICSs, integrated care systems, ICSs, took on statutory responsibility for most of the NHS services in England. They replaced the former clinical commissioning groups, have taken on many of their functions, but they're intended to be a very different type of decision-making body to clinical commissioning groups. They bring in a wider range of partners. They have a greater focus on population health. And so each ICS is made up of an integrated care board and an integrated care partnership. The partnership brings together NHS, local government, and other providers to produce an integrated care strategy, while each integrated care board has responsibility for NHS services, is accountable to outcomes and financial performances for the ICS area. These have also taken on responsibility responsibility for commissioning GP services, and it's expected that further responsibilities will be delegated by NHS England in the future. So it really goes without saying the importance of understanding the health challenges, the requirements of each ICS population for your clinical area. Who are the key leaders in the ICS? Who are the responsible bodies? How are they going to support your engagement at the local level? If we just move to the next slide, please. Thank you. I was going to do an overview of a SWOT analysis, but time is not on my side. So just a very quick point on this is that the UK has a very well developed and globally recognized medtech ecosystem. We've got some of the leading research institutions in the world, world-class universities, a strong network of industry collaboration. So there's a huge number of agencies, funding mechanisms to support you to achieve your ambitions in the UK. But while the system for access is improving, and it has improved considerably over the last few years, it is being hit by financial, budgetary strains on regulators. It's also being hit by a number of financial and budgetary strains on the workforce. The NHS is facing a lot of industrial action at the moment, which means that bandwidth is low, but that really, I think, serves to underline the importance of engaging effectively, of engaging early within your journey of seeking to commercialize your products within the NHS across the various relevant bodies. So just to say, with all of this, we'll share our slides at the end of the meeting, and do get in touch if you have any questions, but I think we'll move on to the next slide to ensure we've got time for the other areas. Brilliant. So I thought it'd be useful just to give you an overview of some of the medtech market dynamics. So within that £150 billion budget, there's about a £10 billion budget per year on medtech. So this provides, of course, significant opportunities, economic opportunities for the medtech sector within the UK. You'll find that the majority of the industry responsible for about 140,000 jobs, about 4,190 businesses in the UK as a whole, is located in the southeast, London, and the east of England. But there are significant clusters in the Midlands and the northeast as well. So you should also consider them when thinking about, what your investment strategy is. This region, the southeast, is supported by some of the UK's leading healthcare infrastructure, great transport links, and the Golden Triangle, which is the science, technology, and innovation cluster of London, Cambridge, and Oxford. So this accounts for about 41% of the employment in the medtech sector. You can see on the slide here a rough breakdown of the market size by product type. It's about a third of the spend of medtech in the NHS is on implants, prostheses, and surgical equipment. But even for the lowest percentage of product types within the top 10, you take the 3%ers on there, we're still talking about a 300 million market in the NHS alone. So there's a significant commercial opportunity. I just wanted to touch very briefly on some of the defining characteristics of the medtech market is actually the sheer range of choice. The MHRA, our regulator, lists about 2 million products registered for use in the UK. So it's estimated for each of these around 500,000 are regularly used in the NHS, and each hospital trust uses around 30,000 different products. So while the scale of opportunity is considerable and significant, as is the challenge of differentiation as well. So when we work with companies to develop a narrative for their product, in this market, the claim of innovation isn't sufficient. You need to have a substantially different offer, a very targeted offer of meeting the requirements of unmet need in a local health population to stand out from your competitors, which may have a similar product. Okay, one final slide from me. This is around the medtech adoption process. So really the purpose of this slide is to give you an overview of the health technology pathway process. And this is focused on England. There's nuances for the other nations, which unfortunately time won't allow us to go into, but of course, very happy to do another session should there be demand for it following this one. So just to give a very clear caveat as well, that given the breadth of background, technology, experience, appreciate 50% of you are already selling into the UK. There's clearly no one size fits all approach. There's no linear approach. Some technologies will repeat multiple steps in the adoption process. Some technologies will skip steps, and some may not be relevant. But we're of course happy to answer any direct questions about your own particular innovation following the call. I've also put on the slide examples of organizations you should seek to engage with at various stages, but it goes without saying, the wider your engagement, the more targeted your engagement, but the more bodies you share your solutions with, the more successful you're likely to be. So the organizations on the slide there are by no means prescriptive. I've broken this down into 5 overall stages: creation, development, evidence, regulation, and commission and adoption. So just to touch on a few points around creation, we're seeking to address, or all innovations are seeking to address an unmet clinical need in the NHS. Now, how do you determine what that would be? So it might be through NHS identified unmet needs, as outlined in strategy documents such as the NHS long-term plan. There's also bodies such as the Accelerated Access Collaborative Demand Signalling Programme. There's also academic health science network-led innovation research needs, which can really support you along this journey. There's also a range of universities, NHS trusts, and patient and public involvement and engagement organisations, which can support you to determine and identify areas of unmet need within the health system. I'm sure many of the companies here will have also set out their value proposition for your product, but an essential element within the NHS will be to undertake a care pathway analysis to consider the impact that your innovation will have on patient pathways, and that can be used to support the value proposition as well. You're also going to need to undertake a medical device class strategy. So the rationale behind this being the principal clinical data that is required by the regulators to demonstrate that a Medtech product performs as intended and is safe to use is dependent on the class of technology, with high-risk Medtech products requiring more extensive clinical evaluation and evidence standards before they can be launched onto the market. Another point is around net zero. Alison's going to provide a much more detailed and learned overview of these, but the NHS has really made clear at the core of your product's offer, you need to consider your environmental impact on carbon emissions and demonstrate that your innovation is developed in collaboration with people with the lived experience of a particular service or health condition that you've outlined. You also need to think about, undertaking an equality and health inequalities impact assessment as well. Finally, you're also going to need to consider intellectual property strategy and establish your commercial vehicle for the product. My strong recommendation is to consult a lawyer on some of those. But I do want to stress at this stage that there's a huge range of organisations, not least the fantastic ABHI, but also publicly funded organisations such as NICE and the MHRA, academic health science networks, which can provide non-financial regional support for idea creation. And of course, when it gets to the point of stating your value proposition, that's something that Lexington can help with as well. The development stage, very briefly, these are the basic activities around securing financial support, seed funding from investors, either private or public or third sector bodies. London and the wider UK, of course, has a thriving ecosystem for this, a thriving venture capital industry, and we'll be happy to put you in touch after the call with organisations who may be able to support you. Also, at this stage, thinking about prototyping, clinical testing, whereby you ensure you're meeting regulatory standards. And there's also the identification of manufacturing and distribution networks and the establishment of a market access strategy as well. Evidence stage, I'll leave this to Phil, but of course this is around thinking about UKCA or CE marking to show that you comply with the relevant standards. And then we move on to the next stage, which is around the HTA process, where you're going to undertake through the National Institute of Health and Care Excellence, the guidance programs for medical technologies. There's 4 key ones: the Medical Technology Evaluation Program, the Diagnostics Assessment Program, the Interventional Procedures Program, and the Early Value Assessment Program. So obviously you'll need to consider which of those is applicable for your particular technology. Then we move on to the next stage after that, is really around the commissioning and adoption stage. And I'll stop in a few moments, but what I would suggest is, that there's 5 key routes to market at the commissioning stage. That's selling directly to trusts, selling directly to primary care, responding to tenders and contracts, NHS supply chain, which is the preferred route to market, and alternative collaborative purchasing agreements, which includes a number of regional procurement hubs that very much welcome engagement with you. So after successful adoption in a few sites, and in theory, innovations after that point should spread across the NHS. And while some do, many proven innovations and best practice techniques tend to do so slowly and unevenly. And I think what I'd like to say around this is with the ICS is now the predominant bodies for commissioning across the 42 geographies of the UK. It makes engagement with them all the more vital. And I'll leave you with that point, is to think about how you're going to engage at the localized level, because nationalized commissioning is fantastic, but the majority of medtech commissioning does take place at the local level. So thinking about what your local strategy is should be really at the forefront of your mind as you go across the various stages of this process. Pass across to Phil.
Thank you, Michael. Next slide then. Okay, so next 5-10 minutes, I'll go through the current regulatory system. I'm sure plenty of you on the call are sitting there saying, yeah, but the regulatory situation in the UK is just not clear. It's not predictive enough. And of course, up until or when we left Europe, we had very much complications with the medical device regulation in Europe. So surely the UK is tricky. It's not tricky, it's just a little bit, just needs describing and sort of implementation on by yourself. So what I've actually called this is pretty much a progressive standstill with regulation at the moment. So the first point is very clear, is that as we stand at the moment, if you're currently CE marking your product, that is recognised in the UK as a route to market. And a CE mark means that you can go straight to the MHRA, you can register your product, and then you can place it on the market. That registration process is fairly straightforward and has a minimal cost associated with it. But when we left Europe, we had the implementation of a UK Medicines and Medical Devices Act, which was the first time that I've ever seen a regulatory piece of legislation aimed primarily at patient safety, including almost a pseudo business-like and money related statement, which says that whatever the regulations are that are going to be implemented post-Brexit, they have to be done in a way that makes the UK an attractive place to do business. And that attractive place is not just selling your product, but it's also developing, researching, manufacturing, and doing your post-market work actually in the UK. Now, we actually have in our statutes at the moment a 2002 statutory instrument, which is based very much on the last iteration of the Medical Device Directive, the In Vitro Diagnostics Directive, and the Active Implantable Medical Device Directive. And that particular statutory instrument is going to be updated rather than repealed in the future. So currently, our regulatory system is based very much on the old MDD, IVDD, and the AIMDD rather than the MDR and the IVDR. It's just unfortunate that, in fact, that regulation is called the Medical Device Regulation in the UK. But there needs to be a pragmatic, or there had to be a pragmatic approach to ensure that product could reach the market and patient safety is not affected, hence the need for a standstill in recognising those CE marks. Back in 21, the MHRA started a consultation for which they had over 950 responses, which really said we really need to continue this EU alignment. And that's what a lot of the big companies were saying. If we don't have this alignment, it means we're going to have to duplicate processes and stuff, without realizing that the new sovereign regulation that will come from that consultation will in fact require that added complication of duplicating effort. So where we have a CA mark, everybody was talking about CA marks, was talking about having UK conformity assessment bodies and UK-based post-market surveillance and so on and so on. So again, there was a pushback on that, and there was a look to see how we could actually sort of ride that and maybe actually sort of work in a little bit more of a streamlined way. So as I said, at the moment, everything is based on the old Medical Device Directive and recognition of that CE mark. But the consultation also talked about the MHRA becoming more involved globally, including things like IMDRF and the Medical Device Single Audit Program, as well as maybe even looking at further efforts on recognition. And did that really sort of result in a change in government policy? Next slide, please. So once we got past that, as a trade body and as manufacturers, we challenged the MHRA actually and said, well, look, by duplicating a lot of this effort that you're asking for within sovereign regulation, you're actually forcing innovation, you're forcing manufacturers, and you're forcing introduction of products away from the UK, because nobody is going to spend a lot of their money, their hard-earned cash, for what is essentially a 3% of the global market. So we've got to look at how we're going to make the UK attractive. So we provoked the MHRA, particularly in the Department of Health and Government, to come up with something else. And in fact, we worked through the Life Sciences Council, which is a committee based, a very senior committee chaired by two secretaries of state, that for business and that for healthcare, to come up with some new proposals. So the Life Sciences Council came up with some recommendations on innovation, regulation and capacity, and how we can change our regulatory system to do just those and make us attractive at the same time. In parallel with that, Dame Professor Angela McLean was tasked with writing a report on pro-innovation regulation, which is a piece of a report which doesn't just cover medical technologies, but also covers other green technologies and other innovative work programs. So looking at how regulation can change as a process rather than how the technical side of regulations are going to change. And we've been doing a lot of work on that. And in fact, the Chancellor in his last budget speech talked about the UK moving towards a recognition and reliance model for future regulation. And that's something which ministers have also reiterated since his budget speech. But that will require a new consultation, and we're expecting a consultation to come out in October, which will supplement that which was conducted in 2021 and gives us a number of current practical activities. Remember, we're looking at that innovation, recognition and capacity issues. Really looking at and working as an industry, how we work across those stakeholders to implement those McLean reports, recommendations, plugging the gaps on recognition. A US recognition is not the same, or sorry, a US approval is not the same as a UK or a European approval, for example. So there has to be some sort of recognition assessments made on that. And then looking at how we can sort of fund and work with conformity assessment bodies in the UK to assess that sort of level of information. At the same time, working on the innovation programs through the Innovative Device Access Pathway, IDAP, and really beefing up some of the work which is done by the Innovation Office within the MHRA, but by providing things like scientific advice, which is one of those key things that the FDA work with. Next slide, please. So, as I say, looking at innovation, international recognition and capacity. Let's move on to the next one, please. And really concentrate on the McLean review. Michael actually showed some a really good slide with that sort of pathway from innovation right the way through to adoption. And the McLean report actually says very much and endorses that. And what we've seen is the MHRA really trying to think about how they can move away from a box-ticking regulatory exercise, which is the second box in that little series there, but trying to integrate regulatory processes from innovation through to adoption. And I think that that's incredibly exciting for the NHS and for UK patients. What it means is that the UK will in fact have that speedier, that sort of more easier access to all of those patients within the NHS, which Michael has already said is a huge asset for the UK economy particularly. But what that means is we have to have a lot of collaboration across government agencies, and that is becoming the norm now. A lot of work is going on between those government agencies, looking at things like centres of excellence for regulatory science and innovation, which is another one of those US initiatives, but providing that sort of thought leadership on how we regulate, particularly things like software and AI are going to form part of that, but also looking at how we then deal with capacity. And we're working with MHRA on things like secondments into MHRA to really sort of deal with that sort of issue around capacity. We're looking at real closer ties within the Maclean report with conformity assessment bodies. In Europe, there's a real separation between conformity assessment bodies or notified bodies and the Commission. What we're looking at here in the UK is making that much more of a collaborative process so that we can again speed innovation and thought leadership on how products should be regulated. And then really learning from some of the other programs which have gone on before, such as ILAP, which is a sister of IDAP, but for the pharma industry, but also things like the COVID experience and how we sort of integrate some of that fast-moving regulation into the way that we work, looking at that process of regulation rather than the actual technical side. So in conclusion, because I think this was my last slide, in conclusion, we're working very much with the regulations which you know already as part of Europe. We're recognising European regulatory approvals, and it looks very much as we're moving towards a wider recognition of other jurisdictions based very much on integrated conformity assessment body work and assessment of those differences between those different regulatory structures. I think that was my last slide. You can go to the next one. Oh, there we go. That, in fact, this is my last one, but you can read that. So connections that you need to make as you move forward, certainly your conformity assessment bodies, and I'll leave this to you because we've only got 20 minutes left, but please sort of take your time to read through that after the meeting and maybe get back to us if you've got any more questions. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Phil. Quickly resolving the echo. I think the key thing that we want to make in these couple of slides here, and the reason I'm here today, is that within the UK, sustainability in supply chains in the NHS, particularly in England and actually further in Scotland, has moved from being a nice to have to a commercial necessity. That's twofold. The first we'll touch on is social value. The second is the environmental side, and this is driven by legislation. So this is a key requirement for all entrants into market and all of those operating here. The half of you who are already looking at the market more closely will probably be well aware of this, but we'll cut across this at kind of top level, and maybe if there's more questions, please do speak to us, because we're doing an awful lot of this at the moment. It's the crux of many, many tenders. So starting with social value, this spun out of central government legislation. It's across all government procurement. What it's recognising is that there is a need to use the huge buying power of government as a social investment. And the NHS has already put this at the core of its model. And all trust tendering from April last year includes a 10% minimum mandatory social value weighting within all procurement tenders. So this is running across trusts and ICSs, and it falls into 5 key themes, which we'll touch on here. At the top level, for a business, the definition is really about the net social and environmental benefit that you can bring through corporate and community activity. And the key thing about this, to reiterate Michael's point, is that it is local. And the second key thing is that it is measurable. And there are particular approaches that are expected of entrants in this respect. So as ever, because we like to complicate things in our systems, we've meshed together environment and social within this. So social value also weaves in climate. This is a mandatory requirement in all social value tendering. It is a minimum 5% normally. And this can be met through a series of different approaches. So this is things like emissions reduction plans. This is things like reinventing or looking at your product design to ensure that you're reducing the environmental impact. So that might include remanufacturing. I know that's something that some people are looking at. There are a whole separate series of pilots and work streams around the workability of that within the UK to make sure that safety and quality marks, as Phil alluded to with CE marks, are included within that. And actually, there's a huge educational program for clinicians to enable that adoption. On a broader thing, there's things like low carbon transportation of your product. There are things like reducing single-use plastics around your products. And there's even things like biodiversity initiatives. So it is quite broad. The second one focuses on well-being, that's physical and mental. That primarily looks at your own staff and your kind of corporate initiatives around these sorts of things. And it includes things like volunteering hours as well. So it really is that kind of more corporate responsibility side of things. The third is equal opportunity. That looks at diversity, and particularly because of UK legislation, modern slavery. NHS supply team are very, very focused on this at the moment, on the latter side. We have a Modern Slavery Act in the UK. There's growing and developing legislation around this. They actually recently undertook quite a significant assessment, and 1,000 businesses were asked to provide additional assessments to the NHS supply team. So this is something that they're looking at very closely. On a broader focus, it's things like apprenticeships and training that you can provide to the local workforce. And I think this is something that we would emphasise. Thinking about your UK footprint in this will help you win bids. And then on the fourth side, tackling economic inequality, that's a bit broader. Again, it's things like living wage, which with politics does tend to move around, but also economic interventions that you may make as an organisation. That's things like creating work opportunities for those with long-term health problems or disabilities. That might be something even like access to quality housing for staff, or it might be looking at career progression and social mobility programmes. And then the final one, which is slightly out with the broader government procurement, is COVID-19 recovery. And that was particularly incorporated into the NHS's approach. And that is about looking, sort of the suggested areas are things like looking at work opportunities for those most impacted during the pandemic in the UK, so those in the 16 to 24 category or over 50s, and also looking at things like the volunteering programmes aligning to that recovery, which is still being felt within the NHS actually in terms of lag times. So the key thing I would emphasise on this before we move on is that it's all about additionality. So what they're looking for in tenders is people who are going beyond their core practices and really thinking about that local side of things. So we're doing a lot of work with people on this in terms of prioritising areas that fit with your business plan, setting strategy, measurement, which is critical to this, and tender support. Which then takes us on to the climate side on our next slide. So the NHS aims to become the world's first net zero national health system. This is spinning out of the UK becoming one of the first countries to have a full net zero plan for the whole nation. How successful we are in delivering that, we leave to you. But I think what's interesting here is that 60% of the NHS's carbon emissions come from its supply chain. Now, the ambition is that in 2045, all of that will be net zero, which pushes that to you. So at the moment, there's a sub-target as well in 80% reduction of all emissions by 2036-39 period, which is very ambitious. So NHS Trust's supply chain leads are telling us that this scope 3 area is the thing that is keeping them up at night, because they don't feel at the moment that they're getting enough out of the sort of the supply chain to feel that they're on track for this, which is part of the reason that we have this very stringent and stretching plan under the NHS Net Zero Supplier Roadmap. So as you can see here, we have some trusts who are actually going further than the 2045. Newcastle, for those engaged with them, have a 2040 target. So they are very, very heavily pushing this to get people who are contracting to them engaged in these plans. So this is the carbon reduction plan. As of this April, all suppliers with contracts over 5 million a year must publish a carbon reduction plan. That's primarily about your own emissions. By next year, it will be all procurement of any scale. By 2027, you must produce one of these for your own business that looks at your own emissions at a global footprint. By 2028, you must have a carbon footprinting requirement for your products as well as your business. And then by 2030, and this is the big one that we really would stress to you, the NHS will not be purchasing from suppliers that have not gone through this process and have not produced carbon reduction plans to this timeline. So this really is a big change, and it is something that the NHS is still developing as it goes. So the earlier you can engage with them and speak to them about this, and to talk to trust to see where the gaps are, be that single-use plastic initiatives, be that things around remanufacturing, to enable the system to accommodate your plans, is going to be so important. And on this final slide, because we're very conscious of time, we want to let you speak, is this idea of the continuous improvement on our next slide. So this came out just last month. This is the Evergreen Sustainable Supplier Assessment Tool. We're very happy to speak to people about this. This is something that everyone should go through. It's a system of continuous improvement. It is there to support you. For those of you who are smaller businesses, we would say that actually there are some caveats to this. There is a 2-year grace period on some of this. There is more support and recognition that smaller businesses and innovative businesses will struggle a little bit with the capacity on this. But what we would say is that actually there is huge brand value and entry value in trying to get ahead and having a sustainability plan and having a carbon reduction plan well in place that fits the UK requirements, because it does mean that you can align and show that you're committed to the market. But we will leave this to Q&A and very much encourage you to come with any questions separately as well. So thank you, Craig, and thank you, Tim.
Excellent. So appreciate you staying on track time-wise. A lot of material, a lot of content, and really valuable. On that note, when we've done these sessions for the U.S. market, for example, it was a 3-part series, 1 hour each. So I believe we have a poll ready, Angela, to ask for some feedback on some areas that you would like to expand on further in subsequent webinar session. So perhaps we could bring that one up.
Oh, Craig, we opted not to do that poll.
Oh, my apologies. Sorry,
No
I thought we were still doing that one. Okay. So actually, what I would ask them maybe just for feedback from the attendees today is I'm going to put my contact information up at the end of the session, and would love to get some feedback, because there's a great content here today. But I also feel like there might be more that you want to dig into, and by some of the questions that came in advance and some of the ones that are coming in online and now as well. On that note, if you have additional questions, let's put those into the Q&A chat now. I'll start with a few. I think the first one I'm going to ask is, I believe tied into Alison, the last part of the presentation. What are your thoughts on the future of single use in the medtech sector in the UK?
A nice easy one there, Craig. I think it's very interesting. I think there's still a big re-education piece to do, particularly with healthcare professionals and clinicians. What we are seeing in talking to different trusts is that it does vary a lot. There are pilots that have been quite successful. For example, there was one that was a take-back scheme, and they worked across 30 hospitals, and they were looking at things like oxygen masks and IV bags, and they were actually repurposing that into the horticultural sector. So people are keen to have new ideas. I think it's probably fair to say that there isn't a single strategy, but there are ambitious targets. I think over even just the last year, they were looking to reduce 190 tonnes of single use. The NHS is primarily doing that within its own footprint at the near term, so things like catering, for example. But the challenge is supply chain, and actually that emphasis will be onto businesses. So if you have ideas and you can bring those into the system, you'll be welcomed with open arms.
Excellent. And other panelists, if you have anything to add, just feel free to jump in. I'll move to there was a direct question that around certain areas of product categories that Phil is answering directly. There is one here, though, that I think for the broader audience is a CE marking based on EU MDR, registrable with MHRA, or does it need to be based on the old MDD?
That's a really good question. And the bottom line on these during this period of standstill, which extends now out to 2028 and 2030, depending on your product classifications and your certificates, it really means that if you can legally place your product on the EU market, then you can place it on the UK market. So if your MDD certificates are still existing and are still applicable and work in that sort of process of placing your product on the European market, it works for the UK. There are a number of things on the MHRA's website about that transition time, which you'd be best or advised to sort of look at, because on that website, it gives you details of which product categories fit in with those different timelines. But essentially, it is a bit of both until all of those MDD certificates run out, and then it's just MDR. And of course, the UK regulatory system, if you are just wanting to come to the UK, everything is based on the old Medical Device Directive, although there is likely to be updates to that, which includes more Europeanized post-market surveillance, for example, which will come into play probably early 24.
Okay, switching gears, I'm going to ask a question that's probably more business development related, or go to market strategy in terms of selling into the UK. What's the best way for companies to engage with the NHS, and what are the key priorities? And this question came in from the audience in advance. Who wants to tackle that one?
I think Michael's busting at the seams, but he's on.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. I mean, we look at the NHS as a single entity. It's really more like a federation of different organisations. As I said in my presentation, you're talking about around 1.5 million people. So maybe to answer that question, I'd like to maybe turn it on its head and shamelessly plug perhaps an email conversation after this with the asker of that question, is to say, I think depending on what your technology is, you need to be really, really targeted in how you do this. With such a large organization, so many different stakeholders you could be speaking to, you know, how much time that you have to be able to put towards that kind of engagement will, you know, it really suggests that you want to be targeted in your approach. So think about the clinical level, think about the therapy area you're working in, think about the clinical level, and then divide at that point at the national bodies that you'd like to speak to. Think about the clinicians that might be able to be supportive KOLs for that area. Think about the content that they're looking at online. Who should you be engaging with in the media? So instead of looking at it as the NHS as a whole, look at particular subsets of the NHS would be applicable to you, and form your engagement strategy after that. And as I say, very happy to have a discussion with that particular the person who's put that question out there to think about how we might be able to support.
Excellent.
That's
Phil, there's a question in there around MHRA registered but need support. I think that one, do you want to take that one separately? And I'll ask.
Yeah, I'll do that one separately if you wish.
Okay, sounds good. So there's a question about why do we see that there is sometimes import tax on some of our medical products? And we hear this one in a lot of markets, actually. Who wants to tackle that one? Import taxes?
That's a really tough one. You know, logistics is one of those really tricky areas. We've often had those sorts of questions around origins of manufacture and certificates of origin and that sort of stuff. And yeah, unfortunately, of course, the UK now is a sovereign nation. So, you know, it's difficult to sort of avoid the fact that there are those sort of national variances and national requirements for that. But I'm not a logistical expert, not in any means, but we can try and take that one offline maybe.
Okay, sounds good. We'll try to formulate something in the follow-up email with the recording and slides from today. If we get a little additional information on that, we'll add it to that communication. Lots of questions coming in here, so try to keep an eye on time here, make sure I don't go over, just down to about a minute or two. So let's go with one here about, you talked about the possibility of marketing your products in the UK if you have the CE mark Can you do the same if you have FDA, or is it only accepting CE mark?
At the moment, it's just the CE mark, but the current discussions with government is that if you are recognizing a CE mark, why can't you recognize other jurisdictions? So there is further discussion on things like FDA approvals, but also Japanese or Australian or South Korean. There's lots of different discussions on at the moment. But what that means is that the MHRA are going through a program at the moment of assessing the delta, the difference between a regulatory approval that's granted in those different jurisdictions with what is considered appropriate within the UK. At the end of the day, a lot of that technical stuff is aligned through the IMDRF, so there's not a great deal of difference between those individual jurisdictions, but the process is different. So I think there's a lot of discussion as to how that sort of work can be farmed off to conformity assessment bodies and who can look at that delta. But at the moment, it's just the CE mark. But it could well be that in the future, we're looking at recognition of those other jurisdictions as well, including FDA.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to have to pause questions there, but what we will commit to is responding to some of the additional questions we didn't get to in our follow-up email afterwards, which will include the link to the recording as well. I really want to thank Michael, Allison, and Phil for the time today. Great content, great presentation. We will put some consideration into a follow-up session. I'm really hoping for feedback from our audience on that. So my email is up there as well. You could send that feedback to me directly, would be fantastic. Michael and Allison and Phil have agreed to share their contact information. If you have any specific questions for them afterwards, feel free to reach out. You can sign up for our platform. There's a link down at the bottom there, right off of our website. And again, I want to thank you all for joining. Allison, Phil, Michael, thank you for your time today. I'm going to switch gears now for anyone who wants to stay on and have a look at the platform. It'll take me about 8 minutes-ish to get through that. And you're welcome to stay on. For those of you that aren't, thank you very much for attending as well. And we will follow up with an email with the recording very soon. So thank you all. I'm just going to switch gears here now. For anyone that's staying on, I'll give you a quick overview of the platform. So just give me half a second to move that over onto my screen. As I'm doing that, I'll also mention that all of our webinars are recorded and the content is shared on our website. So if you've missed some of the ones in the past, there's some great content available here around MDR, for example, IVDR, which we did fairly recently, financing solutions, entering the Gulf countries, and many, many more. So make sure if you get a chance, have a look at that. In the meantime here, let me just move over to the platform, and I'll give you a quick overview of what we do. So this platform is built for manufacturers, distributors, and other organizations in medtech to build and create and build and manage successful partnerships globally. We really do that through 4 aspects of the platform: market discovery, finding and connecting with new partners, managing existing partnerships globally, and then our fintech solutions, which are being released, I mentioned earlier, around foreign exchange and hedging foreign exchange for you as you pay for products globally. I'm going to start first just with market discovery. So this is a view of the world. If most of you today are manufacturers, the markets that are showing up here in green or teal, I suppose, are my active markets. And then the ones that are in purple are the ones that I've identified as target markets. That's part of how I sort of set myself up for growth globally. We cover about 105 countries in terms of market data. So for example, if we were looking at the Brazilian market and you wanted to view that market, we cover about 800 to 1,000 data points that explain the market. Maybe I should have shown the UK market, given that we were just talking about the UK. I believe it's the number 6 largest market in the world. Brazil is 12th. We give an overview of each market, both in terms of healthcare, medical devices, long-term and alternative care. We provide healthcare expenditure and financing overviews, which show you the public-private mix as well as where spending is taking place. And I'm doing this quickly because you'll be able to go have a look at this yourselves if you decide to do so. We provide an overview of healthcare assets, so that would be hospitals, beds, ambulatory care facilities, veterinary facilities, but we also get into things like physicians, clinical specialists, surgical specialists. So for example, if you sell to radiologists in Brazil, know that there are 14,000 of them in that market. We do healthcare utilizations. So these would be surgeries by clinical area, as well as diagnostic exams. And then we cover trends and indicators. So think medical conditions, disease states that might be meaningful for you, as well as useful links there. And then lastly, along the lines of part of today's presentation would be a high-level regulatory overview that just lets you know what the country-specific medical device regulatory authority is, what types of license are required, whether you need local representation for your devices, and then links to any multinational regimes such as MDSAP, Mercosur, CE Mark, et cetera. So we do that in 105 countries. We have companies, though, from the manufacturing distribution side in 150 plus countries. And I'll step over to that now very quickly to show you how you find partners. So there's two ways to do it. One is to search for and try to connect with partners. And the second is to post an opportunity, which I'll focus on secondarily. Although I do think it's actually the more effective way to find new partners. I'll explain why momentarily. We have about 44,000 companies in the platform, roughly half and half manufacturers and distributors. We also have about 1,000 trade associations and organizations, market consultants and regulatory consultants as well. If you were, for example, looking for distribution in a particular market, so let's say we're looking for a distributor or a sales agent, and let's use today's presentation. So I'll say I'm looking for companies that are headquartered in the United Kingdom. That's going to show 590 distributors in the UK market. And from there, I can narrow it down. Let's say I was interested in companies that sell and distribute cardiovascular products. I could apply that, and now you're looking at 55 distributors. You'll notice that some of them are national, some of them are regional. Most are likely national in the UK market, but you will find the odd regional one as well. From there, you can view the company, view their profile, view the detailed profile, which includes a link to their website, their LinkedIn page, an overview of who they are, how long they've been around for, what they focus on. So this company is focused on cardiovascular, cosmetic and plastic surgery, and some PPE. And you can see who they sell into in terms of hospitals, medical departments, administrative departments, as well as selling into nursing and ambulatory care facilities as well. If you're ready to connect to that company, you could do so right through here. And you can explain, why you want to connect, a bit like you would do on a LinkedIn, but of course, this is built specifically for medical device, equipment, supplies, veterinary, dental, et cetera. So that's one way. If you were a distributor and you were looking for a manufacturer, same idea. You could say, I'm looking for a manufacturer or perhaps an OEM. I won't worry about where they're from momentarily, but I am looking for cardiovascular manufacturers. There are 1,502 of those. I'll sort them by headquarter country, so you can see this truly is global, with companies from all over the world represented here. On that note, you could say, perhaps I'm looking for manufacturers from China, or maybe it's I want to exclude a market like China from my list of potential partners. In any case, we also have regulatory and certification consultants, trade organizations, market consultants, logistic providers, all on here as well for you. So that's one way to find partners, to develop new partnerships. The more effective way, in my opinion, frankly, is finding partners through what we call opportunity posts. And opportunity posts are more specific, real-time needs for a partner. So for example, here's a great example, Hagenberger, which is a UK-based manufacturer of vaginal retractors. So you'll see here, Hagenberger in the United Kingdom is looking for obstetrics, gynecology distributors in Germany for their vaginal retractor. They've also laid out here a great description of what they are, what their market advantages are. And in fact, they've included a document here, which I could download, that provides an overview of the actual retractor itself. So what this does is it actually takes what they're looking for. So in this case, obstetrics, gynecology distributors in Germany, and it does some matching with profiles in the platform. So it will create a list of matched companies for Hagenberger. It will also be promoted to those matched companies. Those matched distributors will see this particular opportunity very high on their list in terms of matching score. And so, a German distributor of obstetrics this particular opportunity would be very high on their list in the platform. And you can see in my case, my match scores don't really matter because I'm in here as my Caribou and we are neither a distributor or a manufacturer, of course. But your match scores would be anywhere from 100% down to 0% on those opportunities. I'll show you just one other example, perhaps a distributor. So here's an example of a distributor, a US-based distributor looking for a very specific thing, which is robotic OCT and color fundus cameras. And again, if you had that type of product and we're looking to sell in the United States, that opportunity would be very high on your list. And you can see these are real time. Many of them come in the last couple of days, quite a few this week actually, in a variety of markets all over the world. Those are called opportunity posts. For you, you can create an opportunity post as part of your free trial. It's a very simple 5 or 6 step process. Put in some information that you saw in those opportunities I mentioned to you previously, and then we promote those through the platform and indeed on places like LinkedIn, various chat groups around the world, as well as emails that we send out. On that note, if you are a subscriber to the platform, if you're on the platform, whether you're in a free listing or whether you're in a paid subscription, you would actually get a weekly update of the 5 top opportunities that match for you in a single email per week, which is a great way to maybe not fill up your inbox quite so much as getting them from all these opportunities. The next thing I'm just going to move to very quickly here is, let me just close this so I can see it. There we go, is partner management. So it's one thing to go find partners and connect with and create new great distribution partnerships globally or supplier partnerships globally. But this is also a great platform for managing your partnerships and potentially collaborating with those partners right in the application. So what you're seeing right here is called My Partners, and I've identified in various markets around the world who my partners are. So for example, in Argentina, I have 2 distributors. In Australia, I have 2. Whether I invite them in here to collaborate with me is something I can choose on a case-by-case basis. Some cases you'll see, for example, that we have not. We're just using it internally with our team. In other cases, you'll see that we have in fact invited in. So let's use perhaps GC Medical as an example. Here we've invited in Marcia Nobre to be an editor in our shared space together between the distributor and the manufacturer. And from that, you can then start to do things like have discussions. You can have file sharing, do quarterly business reviews. You can see we're doing sales forecasting on a quarterly basis here. I'm doing it by partner, by market, basically. You can have various discussions on topics with those partners. You could even manage little projects together, like market launches or events that you're doing together in those markets. Now, one of the great advantages of doing this in the platform is that you can then effectively communicate with multiple partners all at once. So for example, if I wanted to send a message to all of my partners, many of my partners, some of my partners, you'll see here I can pick and choose which ones. Right now I've selected all, but I can pick and choose the ones that I want to communicate with. And I could send a single message or share a file or files with all those partners simultaneously. So let's take an example of a product update. You could attach a new video, a link to a video, a product fact sheet, a link to a fact sheet, however you want to do that. You can share some information about it, describe it, etc. And then it will go out to all the partners. You'll notice here that some of my partners I haven't invited in yet, so they're in red, as you can see down below here. But these other ones will get this fact sheet and the communication I put around that all with a couple clicks. So think about the efficiency of that, of being able to communicate with multiple partners all over the world in a few clicks, whether that's just something, a short communication. We're going to be at Medica. We would love to connect while we're there. We have an update to our product X and have a look at this information, this video, et cetera. Imagine that ability to communicate so efficiently and effectively with those partners. So My Partners is an amazing part of the platform. I really just scratched the surface here. And again, you can either just manage your partners through here. So I could manage the data around our partnerships around the world, or even better, invite them in to collaborate. and it's extremely simple to do that. For example, in this case, with Cal Surgical, we could invite them in, and they would have access only to share with me specifically on that shared workspace together. They don't know who else I'm doing business with. They have no visibility to anything else. It's just creates a little space that the two companies can work together. So I'll leave it at that in terms of partner management. The only thing I'll add at this point is that we are releasing payment processing and foreign exchange. I'll give you just a quick view of that. Well, in fact, I'm running out of time, so maybe we'll cover that off in detail today. But you'll be able to basically have distributors pay suppliers directly through the platform. Those distributors can save 2 to 3% on foreign exchange on spot rates, and we'll be able to lock in for up to 350 days to eliminate some of the currency volatility that affects their margins. If you're a manufacturer on the call today, think about what that does for you in terms of margin conversations with distributors, in terms of helping provide value to your distributors that can't be brought through anything other than this platform. So not only can you manage, collaborate, communicate together in the platform, but you could actually save them money as they pay you. And typically they're paying you in USD or in euros, but they're all over the world and their currencies are fluctuating and they're getting hammered by the banks, frankly, in terms of exchange rates. I think we can all probably relate to that. So that's being released later on this year. We're creating a wait list right now because we've had so much demand for that from our audience. So on that note, I'll wrap up there. I appreciate you staying on. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to us. You can join the platform right off of our website. It is free, so it's right on the sign up link here. You'll see it all over the website. Reach out to us directly if you have any questions as well. There is a chat panel right on our website as well. You can ask questions. When you go to sign up, they will offer an orientation session as well to spend some time with you and helping you set up your profile and helping you do your first opportunity post, for example, answer any questions you have as you go. So on that note, I want to thank you all very much for staying on. I appreciate that. I know it's over the hour, but I do appreciate you staying on and having a look at the platform today. Thank you again. Have a fantastic rest of your week and weekend, and we look forward to more of these sessions in the future. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.